Oh, hey there, I'm Jeff. Welcome to Oh, Hey There with Jeff. Today we're going to be talking about winching safety and tips.
I'm here to talk about overlanding, from how-tos, advice, gear, vehicle builds, and everything in between.
Let's start out by doing a basic gear inspection. Over here we're going to start with our metal hardware. So we've got a snatch block. We want to go over that, make sure our bearing is spinning freely. Check the groove of the wheel itself. You want to make sure there's no dings or burrs in there, specifically if you're using a synthetic rope. Otherwise your synthetic line can grab in here and start to fray. Make sure that you've got this thing greased up properly. Also make sure that your rings here, your snap rings are in place, and you want to look through this thing. Make sure that everything's symmetrical. There's no stress marks or cracks on the metal itself. Moving on to your D-shackle. Same thing as we did with the snatch block. Just make sure everything's symmetrical. No marks on the metal that suggest it's stretching, or no cracks. You want to make sure that these threads are good, so everything threads up nicely when you go to use it. One thing about the D-shackles is you can find some out there that aren't the best quality. I don't know if you can tell on this one here, but it's a little skewed. We did a pull with it a while ago and it ended up shifting, moved a little shape there. So if you need to spend a few extra dollars to get something that's a little better quality, I highly suggest that. I have seen one snapped before, and you can see on the inside there are a few air bubbles. It just wasn't made properly. Let's move on to our gloves. Always have gloves with you, especially if you're using a steel rope. These ones are pretty heavy duty, they're durable. It's a great option to go with. These are just the ones we get from Warren. Also, a full leather glove is gonna work just fine. Over to our tree saver. Same thing with the metal as we checked on our shackles and snatch block. Make sure that everything is symmetrical, no stretch marks. You're gonna go through the strap itself, make sure there's no cuts or frays. Moving on, we have our remotes here. We've got the standard wired remote, so that's gonna plug right into the head of your winch. You wanna make sure that your connections here are all clean, there's no corrosion. If there is, go ahead and clean that out. Check the winch side of that too, make sure everything's clean. And then go ahead and before you go out, plug it in and just make sure that everything functions properly so your in and out is gonna work for you. On the wireless remote, you wanna turn that on, make sure that it's holding a charge, and then cycle through this thing. Make sure your clutch engages and disengages with this, and also run through the functions of your winch while using your wireless remote. Then finally, make sure your hardware is all fastened properly on your winch fairlead. Make sure your winch itself is tightly fastened to your mount. On from that, we just have a line dampener here. These things rarely go bad, but it can be kind of a pain if it starts to fall apart and you actually want to use these pockets inside. Make sure that all of that stuff's together. Check the tops of it. If it's starting to rub out, it looks like it's something that a line can go through, just go ahead and get a new one. So there you go. Make sure you inspect all this stuff before you get out in the field. Let's take a minute and talk about spooling your line onto the drum. Now this is for your first installation of that line. Some people forget this, but you need to stretch the line onto your drum. The reason for that is your anchor on here isn't meant to take the weight of a car or to do a recovery. So imagine, if you will, you got your line on here and it's just wrapped up. You haven't put it under tension when you actually spool it up. You pull on that and that thing's not gonna grab, it's gonna unwind. So we don't wanna put that stress on your anchor in here. We want it to actually be onto the drum itself. Good way to do that is you unspool your line and then you attach it to an anchor, and then you just pull the vehicle to that anchor. We'll give you a step-by-step process on how to do this. If you go to this link, you'll find out how to do it. One thing to keep in mind about your winch is to get the rated maximum pull, you have to be on the first layer of wrap around your drum. So for instance, if you have a winch that's rated to 8,000 pounds, you need to have your line wrapped directly on the drum to get that 8,000 pound pull. Each layer you add to that decreases your pull by roughly 15%. So that means by the time you get to your fourth layer, you're down to around a 5,000 pound pull instead of 8,000 pounds. So that's 3,000 pounds that you're losing right there. Now, a way to help with this, if you're in an area where you have only a short distance, you can pull out a snatch block or two and route that line so you get a full extension out to that first layer, and then you can get your full 8,000 pounds worth of pull. In addition to that, make sure you always have at least 5 wraps of line on your drum. Just for safety precaution, go less than that, you're putting a lot of stress on your drum and onto your anchor. Safety tip for when you're using a hook, if you hook from the top and this breaks, it'll fly up into the air. However, if you hook from the bottom and this breaks, it'll shoot into the ground. Let's talk about a few of the differences between steel rope and synthetic rope. Here we use all synthetic rope. The main reason for that is it saves weight. A few other things that are nice about the synthetic rope is it's really easy to move and manipulate. So when you're doing a free spool that's really long, you're not having all that weight drag on you, and you can move it in any direction you need to. Another great thing about it is it doesn't store as much potential energy as a steel rope. So if it does break, it's far less likely to injure someone and it'll just drop to the ground. Some of the downsides of the synthetic rope are it's really susceptible to abrasion. Also, UV light can deteriorate the line, so you need to keep it covered up as much as you can. So because of that, you always want to make sure you're doing your line inspections or rope inspections after use, and make sure you clean your line. If needed, you can always use an abrasion sleeve to guard any areas of high friction. The best thing about a steel rope is it's really durable, so it's going to resist abrasion and it's not susceptible to the UV light. Some of the negatives on the steel rope is it's heavy, it can rust, and it can get burrs, which is why you need those heavy leather gloves. Also, it stores a lot of potential energy, so if it snaps, it can cause injury. So there you have it, some basic safety guidelines and tips on winching. I hope that helps. If you have any questions or comments, please leave them below, and we'll see you next time.